All right. We've got a critical mass within the room, and we're going to get started. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of Episcopal Parish Network. Wishing everyone a blessed Advent and hope that you are not too hectic in this busy season. We are very pleased to present this workshop today on the situation in the Sudans and the work of the American Friends of the Episcopal Churches in the Sudans. And thank you to our team for joining us here today and for this discussion. Looking forward to a robust discussion, and we have one more panelist that will be added shortly. Hope that you all will join us in Kansas City. AFRECS will be with us in the exhibit hall at our annual conference, the 40th annual conference, February 25th through 28th of 2025. You can find out more about that in the post that I am adding to the chat right now, and we invite you to put where you are dialing in from into the chat, your name, your parish, your city, and your state. Without any further ado for me, I'm going to hand it over to Anita and find our other panelist and get that person on the line. So thanks so much, and appreciate it, Anita.
As we begin, we ask God's mercy on the people of the Sudans, the women, the children, the men, young and old, who have only lived in a time of war and conflict. Lord, have mercy upon your people. Welcome to all of you and to our panelists, who I will introduce in a few minutes. Many of you joining this webinar have been engaged with the people of the Sudans, while others may know very little. We aim to share some current information about the ongoing crisis and to point out positive developments that offer signs of hope. Thank you to Joe Swimmer of the Episcopal Parish Network for his leadership in making this webinar possible. And thanks to the Executive Director of AFRECS, Dane Smith, for developing this topic today and for organizing our panel. My name is Anita Sanborn, and I serve as the president of the board of AFRECS, the American Friends of the Episcopal Church of the Sudans. I will serve as moderator. AFRECS began just over 20 years ago. We are a network of individuals, churches, dioceses, and other organizations that seek to focus attention on the pastoral and peace-building priorities of the Episcopal Church of South Sudan and the Episcopal Church of Sudan, and to enable American friends to assist both churches in meeting the needs of their peoples. Founded by lay and clergy leaders of the Episcopal Church who were active in humanitarian projects, on international legal cases, individuals who had served in the Sudans as teachers of theology or as staff to the United States Agency for International Development, and many others. At that time, around the turn of the last century, the most recent century, the civil war between the Sudans had already earned the tragic distinction of being the longest civil war in history. The numbers of people forced to flee their homelands and become refugees was in the millions. Many of these refugees found their way to the U.S., and the Episcopal Church and other churches across the U.S., from upstate New York to Denver and California to South Dakota, Nebraska, Chicago, from Iowa to Maine, we found ourselves learning for the first time of the Civil War and the suffering of millions. And we learned over the ensuing years that even achieving the comprehensive peace agreement and realizing the dream of independence in 2011, all that could not guarantee a secure and progressive South Sudan. I myself was one of those Episcopalians who in 2001 became involved after a refugee resettlement agency put out a call for volunteers. I became involved with AFRECS, and in 2004, I traveled to Chad and the border camps serving Darfuri refugees with a delegation of South Sudanese This was to deliver humanitarian aid, and it was organized by one of our panelists, Tom Pritchard. You'll hear from him later. Save Darfur was a cry heard throughout the world in those days, but it remains a sad fact to this day that the crisis in Sudan is still not covered by the world press with the same attention as are the equally horrific ongoing crises in Gaza and the Ukraine. So learning to be in relationship with the refugees from South Sudan was a challenge that AFRECS, was able to help the Episcopal Church address. We continued to be in relationship with church leaders in the Sudans, and we were there to provide information, assistance, not always financial, but to support bishops who were trying to keep schools going, to feed and educate orphans, and to organize trauma healing programs. Today, the impact on the beleaguered church in the Sudan has been overwhelming, as they have been forced to evacuate Khartoum and relocate to Port Sudan. Tens of thousands of displaced persons are still flooding into South Sudan, where the church struggles to house and feed them. In this present crisis, the church continues to be a pillar of civil society. Throughout all these years, the board of AFRECS has traveled back and forth between the American church, keeping the bonds of friendship open between the American church and the Sudanese. We've hosted conferences, engaged in advocacy, and became a significant communicator between parties. Today, we continue to stand with the Episcopal Church in the Sudans, and we are engaged in a significant way with the new Episcopal University of South Sudan as it develops its campus and faculty outside of Rokan. We hope you will join us and spread the word. Now I'd like to introduce you to our panelists who will continue our discussion of the current crisis in the Sudan and point to ways we can support aid efforts and advocate for peace and justice. Nimat Ahmadi is the founder and president of the Darfur Women's Action Group based in Washington, D.C. Tom Stahl is a member of the AFRECS board and a former USAID counselor, which is the most senior career position within USAID. He served as acting USAID director for Sudan this past summer. We hope to have Bishop Elsir Kuku, the Bishop of Haiban, on the call, but so far he has not been able to join us. And Tom Pritchard is the founder and executive director of Sudan Sunrise in Fairfax, Virginia. Each panelist will speak for 5 minutes, and following, we will pose several questions for our panelists to respond to. Nimat, I invite you to speak first.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I would like to thank the Episcopal Church for organizing this important event. I think it is really timely, and I would also like to thank you and all of your members in the first genocide of the 21st century in Darfur that shocked the world conscious and prompted American citizens here to rise and organize and demand an action from their government. Your church was among the first, and we have not forgotten that. And I think coming today at a time when Sudan is barely in the news, while the worst humanitarian crisis happening, is really important. And this shows the people of Sudan that we are not alone. And I thank you for that. Unfortunately, speaking to you at a time of very grave concern about what is going on in Sudan and in Darfur in particular. As yesterday, I woke up into an air bombardment in my hometown that killed 80 people. Many more have been wounded, and still the count is ongoing because it was a market day It's a place where people come quickly to get what they need, their basic need. Unfortunately, the government airplane have bombed the city, crowded area. Some people burned inside their stores. Women and children were being impacted and killed, and people were frantic, still collecting the dead bodies and the injured to take them to the hospital, and there is barely health services. So your prayer and your prayers will definitely help our people. Today, it has been 19 months since the crisis in Sudan started. What we all know, it started as a power struggle between the two generals, quickly spread it across the country, and have shown trend that we have not seen in any crisis recently. While the rapid support forces are occupying civilian homes, killing people, forcing them out of their homes, abducting women and children, including young girls as young as 7 years old, have been victims of rape. And at the same time, the Sudan Armed Forces is bombing, using airstrike, mostly bombing civilian homes, civilian infrastructure, public services, including water sources, electricity, telecommunication companies have been cut off. And at the same time, the crisis has sharply escalated and expanding every day. And the rapid support forces have unfortunately committed an active genocide. While we see that there are war crimes and crimes against humanity being committed in Khartoum and other areas, in Darfur, the story is very different. It's not different than the 2003 genocide that has been confirmed by the International Criminal Court, by the UN agencies, and by the United States. Both legislative and executive organs have declared the situation a genocide. Unfortunately, today, the people of Darfur become the #1 target in this war in Sudan, whereby the rapid support forces will come into the city. They first make sure that they isolate people from any survival means. They loot properties, they loot markets, they loot food storages, and they destroy it and burn it, including looting vehicles. Those who are killed are unable, those who are wounded are unable to be taken to a hospital because they can't have even transportation. Precisely taking all survival means to isolate people. At the same time, the air bombardment, ethnic targeting have been deliberately used, as we have seen in the case of Al Junaina, whereby the Masalit people were systematically targeted house after house, killing them and raping women, abducting young people and murdering them in public. People were prevented from taking their loved one to hospitals. They were prevented from burying the dead bodies of their loved one. And we all have seen the shocking videos of the West Darfur governor who was killed for nothing because of who he is, because of being from Masalit. And his people, their bodies have been degraded. And the rapid support forces have declared that now we have liberated the land from the Abid. The Abid is an Arabic word for a slave, and that Al Junaina and West Darfur is no longer Dar Masalit. It's no longer the homeland of Masalit. It is now being called Dar Arab. Now the Arabs occupied Al Junaina as I speak to you. It is not only in Al Junaina, they went after that a city after city in Zalingi, Central Darfur, in Kutum, North Darfur, in Tawila, in Kapkabiya, my hometown. In most of these areas, they targeting precisely cities that are inhabited by indigenous African tribes.
Nimat, we have a question, and it's from Kwathi Ajawan. He's asking, is the RSF the same as the Janjaweed that committed the genocide in Darfur before?
Absolutely. These are the Janjaweed who have committed the genocide in Darfur 20 years ago. But the difference is that the Janjaweed used to be in a horse and camel back. Now they are more advanced with more training, with more equipment, with more money, with more weapon advance and technology, having international and regional allies such as United Arab Emirates who have been pumping funding and weapon for them to continue to murder and massacre our people. And so that is the difference between them, but the same machinery.
I'm very appreciative of the very personal account you are sharing with us. We will come back to you later in the discussion, and I'd now like to invite Tom Stahl to share some comments with us. Unmute, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Anita, and thanks to you, Nimat, for your direct personal description of what's going on there. Yeah, the war is active yet. It's little known in the West yet, as you mentioned, but it is actually the worst humanitarian crisis in the world as we speak. As a part of the international community, there is a way of measuring food insecurity, and there's a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the worst, and 5 being famine, and 4 being emergency on the cusp of famine. And if you add up the numbers of people in those two categories, within famine and almost famine, within Sudan, there are more people there than in all other disasters in the world combined. Okay, it's that bad, and it's ongoing. That's making it really difficult for the international community to provide assistance because the war is active and going on, just as Nimat was describing. And in Darfur, especially around El Fasher, there's a major refugee camp called Zamzam, around 500,000 people, and they've already actually officially declared famine there. And there's probably famine going on elsewhere. The problem is we just can't access the areas where the worst thing, fighting and the worst situation is. Right now, about half of the country, at least 25 million people, are in urgent need of foreign assistance, of humanitarian assistance. About 12 million at least have been displaced from their homes, either internally or to other countries. About maybe 2.5 million of those are refugees, either in Chad, in South Sudan. Some have gone to Egypt, some have gone to Ethiopia, Eritrea, but it's a huge, huge movement of people. We're not sure of the death toll. We know it must be high, probably in the hundreds of thousands, especially if you add up not only the direct people who've been shot and killed or bombed, but you add up the people that have died of diseases that would have been treated if there was not the fighting going on, and of course the famine situation and starvation. So definitely we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people have died already because of this war. Nimat mentioned the rapid support forces, and they are they were started with Janjaweed, and as she mentioned, they've expanded and gotten more support. They actually control probably 70-75% of the areas of the country where people live. So they have a huge area that they control and make it almost impossible to get in there. What's left of the government, which is referred to as the Sudan Armed Forces, they've had to move the capital to Port Sudan and operate out of there. But then they only control a relatively smaller area from the eastern side of the country. And so it's very difficult for the humanitarian assistance people to try to move around. There was finally, the US has a special envoy for Sudan, and a guy named Tom Perriello. He's been trying to negotiate. He's tried to pull together the sides, but even most recently they called for a peace talks in Geneva, and the Sudan Armed Forces didn't even show up. He finally was able to get into Port Sudan recently, and then after that, the UN humanitarian coordinator went in. They have gotten some agreement to establish what they call humanitarian hubs. So they would put UN and other humanitarian international officials into a few key locations. Unfortunately, not Darfur. They're Kadugli, El Obeid, and Damazin. But so far, the only place they've been to is Damazin. So they really need to get that going. Trying to get food into the midst of fighting is very difficult. The latest report I could get, they got about 1,000 trucks into Darfur in the last month. Well, that sounds like a lot, but when you consider the needs, it's a trickle. It's very little. They need tens of thousands of trucks getting in, and they are pushing that, but the fighting is making it so difficult to get in there. What else can I say? There is some civil society that the international community is trying to support, both within the country and outside. Human rights groups, women's groups, things like that. It's very difficult because of access, but using some technology, they're able to provide some support, and they're trying to do things. That's our only way of really helping people within the country, and we need to build that up. We can get more into other things later on in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I know it's a brief time. There have been a lot of questions in the chat. One or two have to do with where people can find good resources to explain the significant parties and what they're fighting for. I can just say that Wikipedia actually has very good charts and descriptions of the various factions and parties. Certainly a map would help. Also, our executive director, Dane Smith, has put together a lot of information. And if people would let us know, we can certainly be in touch with you directly. I want to acknowledge that there are people here on the call from the UK. There are people here from Haiti. Lots of people who have been involved with the Sudans over the years, but also I'm seeing a lot of new people. So continue to post your questions, even if we won't have time to get to all of them. I would now like to invite Tom Pritchard to speak to us, and then we will have time for lots of interaction and discussion. Tom.
You blacks are insects, you're dogs, you don't deserve this good land. This is what the RSF attackers said in Darfur. Attackers recruited from many sub-Saharan African nations who had been promised that if you attack Darfur, drive the people off the land is yours. And they've said that. This is Arab land now. I don't think the world really grasps how racial and the extreme atrocities being committed against the people. People burned alive, people buried alive. Yesterday I was with the Paramount Sultan of the Masalit, and he said there were thousands of people that he saw killed. Thousands. And the atrocities committed against them are beyond imagination. One thing I think you can do is to be aware of what the survivors have said. We have a film coming out. I've made 2 trips to the camps in Chad, and last month was there, and we had an international war journalist, Holly McKay, with us, and we've created a film that should be about 20 minutes long. It's not come out yet, but it will be out in a number of days. And this is a chance for you to hear exactly what Nimat was just talking about of the suffering of the Masalit and their firsthand testimonies. I think one thing that we can all have is outrage about what has happened to these people. The world has been in many ways blind to what's going on. And one of the key players in all this is the United Arab Emirates. If there were a movement of people in this country like the divesting of in South Africa, I think United Arab Emirates would change their tune in a heartbeat. But the world's not paying attention. I encourage everybody on the call to see this film and maybe have gatherings and call together Darfurians and other Sudanese who are in your area. I think one of the things they need to see, people of other faith backgrounds standing up with them and not just ignoring them. They feel, why is the world, everybody's ignoring us? Well, this is a chance for us to show we're not ignoring them.
Tom, I don't know if you remember during the first phase of the genocide in 2004, there were many churches that put out banners that said, "Save Darfur." And a little boy asked his priest, he said, who is Darfur? He thought Darfur was a person. All the banners that said, "Save Darfur."
I love that. I love that. We need that again.
Where can people find out about this film you're describing?
You can put your email in the chat, or you can reach out to me. The simplest email is just Tom Pritchard with no T in it @gmail. And as soon as the film comes out, we'll send it to you. It would be wonderful if you and your parish would watch the film with Sudanese and hear their response to the film and hear their testimonies. Now, one thing that I want to mention, in the midst of horror, there are always shining bright lights. And there's one extraordinary thing being done by Masalit doctors in the Meche camp in Chad. And these were doctors who themselves had their families killed. They had lost everything they had. They escaped with their clothing. And with some plastic tarps, they said, we're going to create a clinic. And so they've now created a clinic that's a beautiful clinic. It's doing very well. And there's a network of Sudanese who are helping support it. But they want to expand this kind of clinic into every one of the camps. The beautiful thing is the people in that camp are seeing their own family doctor. And they're having a sense of community again. Also, the clinic has a feeding program, feeding some of the most at-risk children. So there are ways in which we can not only, I think we need to get people riled up. People need to be appalled. They need to be angry that people are being told that because they're Black, they're insects and don't deserve the land. This is appalling that it's happening in our day. But we have to stand up shoulder to shoulder with them. And I encourage people not only to see this film and to educate their people, but also to call for interfaith gatherings so that the people of Darfur and Sudan are not feeling alone. We've got to do that. It should be happening across the Episcopal Church, in every church.
At this point, there have been a lot of people wanting to know the name of the film, and I indicated we'd be letting them know. So, Tom, you might want to put that into the chat. But I'd like to turn back.
I don't know the name yet. Don't know it. So.
Okay, you haven't titled it yet.
Yeah.
I'd like to turn back to you, Nimat. You've been listening to this. There may be thoughts and actions that you believe friends here in the United States and around the world, for that matter, can take. You can unmute, Nimat. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think one of the actions can take, as many of you have mentioned, we are missing the Save Darfur movement. Even though this crisis has been going on for more than a year and a half, there hasn't been grassroots mobilization, outreach to Congress, both sides of the Senate and the House. In the past, that's something we have done successfully. That is where we can, the legislative side will exercise pressure on the executive side. That is what we need to do. We also had letter writing campaign and also letter to the editor of the local newspaper, so that locally let people locally within their state know exactly what is going on, to keep the attention, because without attention we can. And then partnering with the Sudanese Darfur-led organization, because one of the challenges is that most of the funding has always been given to large, like well-established organization, and of course they have the capacity to do the humanitarian work. In this situation right now, when all the humanitarian had to leave because of the insecurity, those of us with a small organization, we left on the ground, but then we don't have those resources. Even now, in the midst of crisis, we have volunteers, we have staff, people who dedicated and remain within the on the ground. So also that is something that will definitely help, and just organizing, getting out. And I think interfaith people have been instrumental in advocating and speaking up, and also providing humanitarian support. So individually and groups, and you through your congregation and churches, there is a lot that you can do. And then getting to know about what is happening and share with people around you, bringing a speaker to your church. We have done that in the past. We will always happy to be able to locate a local person, or either we can come when the circumstances allow. And so just keep on getting up to date, and also reach out to us if you need up-to-date information about the situation and when the need is, and who are the credible people that you can collaborate with.
So Nimat, you are available to come and speak to churches, obviously, or groups, interfaith groups, and you could put people in touch with other speakers, as I understand you to say?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that is like putting people one on one, that will help people to know about what is going on, and also to know what needs to be done on. And then now, as we have a new government, we have a new members of Congress, some of whom they never heard about Darfur. They may hear about Sudan here and there. So we need to sustain that engagement, and also make sure that we educate this new member. And the more we do at the grassroots level, as the congregations level and churches and interfaith community, they are instrumental in terms of influencing and impact, and putting pressure on our representative, our elected officials, to do what we want them to do.
I can say that in 2025 coming up, AFRECS is going to be hosting a number of public events in the Washington, D.C. area. And I know that our executive director, Dane Smith, will be reaching out to you, Nimat, to join us, and to join people of other faith communities. Many people on the chat are looking for resources. They need resources for their churches. So you might let us know what we can make available to people. I'd like to ask Tom Stahl to address, and then maybe after that, Tom Pritchard, you might have an idea, thoughts as well. Why is it that the Save Darfur movement that was so impactful back in 2004, why has that not, why haven't we seen that again?
Yeah, thanks, Anita. I mean, I do think that, what's going on in Ukraine, in Gaza, and even now Syria, and all those are capturing the headlines. And it is a big problem that we're not getting the media coverage that it deserves, considering how big a crisis it is. Part of that is, the same problem that the humanitarian folks are facing of access. And trying to get in there and getting pictures and interviews of people within Sudan. Actually, the chief international correspondent of the BBC was just in Janina I think, or maybe it was Alingi, I forget. I think it was Janena, not too long ago, about a week or two ago. And that's the first I heard of an international journalist getting into Darfur. There have been a few that have gotten into Port Sudan and stuff, but that's not where the real big problems are. So anything we can do to get more international press and obviously media coverage of what's going on, so that some, people could write to their own local newspapers and so on and say, hey, what's going on in Sudan? Tell us more about it, and try to put pressure on the media to get the word out and focus more, because it is the world's largest humanitarian disaster. And as Nima was saying, there are a lot, the Sudanese are amazingly resilient people. As soon as this war started and areas were, taken over and people killed, local community groups immediately popped up to help people within their community. And we need to find ways to work through them, support them. I know certainly from USAID and a lot of the international donors, they are trying to work through these local community groups to provide assistance. The problem is trying to get funding and resources to them. They're able to do some through electronic transfers and things like that, but it's still very difficult. I mean, the same is true. There's a lot of human rights and women's groups and civil society groups and so on outside of Sudan, in in Kampala, in Nairobi, elsewhere, who are trying to raise the issue. And the more we can support them and their efforts, and for them coming together to put pressure from the civilian side on the leaders. The problem is, to end the fighting, when you think about it, there's no incentive for the leaders of these two warring parties to stop fighting, because as soon as they do stop fighting, they will either be assassinated or thrown in prison for human rights violations. So they're going to stop fighting. So as Nimat was saying, we need to put pressure on the organizations, the governments, and so on that are supporting them, like the UAE and others. And that's the only way we're going to get the fighting to stop and getting access into the country.
Tom, Pritchard, can I ask you to comment?
There are some beautiful bright lights in various places. One, in South Sudan, there are various things being done for war refugees that are both returnees and refugees. The Diocese of Awil has accepted about 150 children into their schools who are from Darfur. They've also started an agricultural program and are trying to help at one of the large camps. But all scattered across South Sudan, there are things that are being done. We're a fiscal partner for South Sudan Women United, and they helped 10,000 people flee the war and get to South Sudan. So there are things being done. I think it's very important to connect with those.
I'd like to invite Dane Smith into this conversation. Dane is the executive director of AFRECS. So Dane, if you'd unmute yourself, we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Anita. I've been listening with great interest to the presentation. I wanted to double what Nimat and Tom have said about the resilience of the Sudanese. One of the things that's been going on is the rising up of emergency response rooms, as they're called. Civilians, particularly in the Khartoum, Omdurman area, that have set up daily feeding for people, 1 meal a day, in a situation in which starvation is becoming more and more of a problem. I heard recently that the emergency response rooms have even been providing schools for some children in these areas, which of course schooling has just stopped. I did want to mention, in Darfur, we've talked about the horrible situation of the Mesalit. The Mesalit are not the only African, so-called African groups in Darfur, and perhaps Nimat could tell us a little more about the Zaghawa and the Fur, how they're faring in this situation in which the Mesolite have particularly been a target of genocide. I think that would be interesting to learn about.
Nimat, would you like to, or can you address that, the other groups that have been targeted?
Yes, definitely. Unfortunately, yes, it's not only Masalit. Al Junaina, West Darfur, was the largest city with the large population of Masalit, but also there are other tribes. But they, as I mentioned, other cities like Zalingi in Central Darfur, predominantly for Al Fashir, right now is the hottest area where escalated violence and bombardment and shelling going on, is the predominantly occupied by Fur. The second tribe, Zagawa, Berti, these are all indigenous African that have been targeted. And Zamzam camp, Abu Shok camp are still under attack. Kapkabia, my hometown, is predominantly Fur. So precisely targeting areas that occupied by these tribes. And they say it publicly and record themselves that these are slaves, kill them, remove them from their land. And so it is very, very deliberate and systemic in its nature. And so, and even now we have people still in Zamzam camp. Last week, Zamzam has received the most shelling that killed many tens of people. Many people have been forced to flee, but they have nowhere to go because Al-Fashir is in the center of Darfur. They are not in close proximity to any neighboring country that they can go to. And so I think as ways to exercise pressure is like pushing the U.S. government to stop selling arms to United Arab Emirates, sanctions and individual targeted sanctions, because the more they have money, the more they can bring weapons. They also buy loyalties by recruiting fighters from West African countries. Right now, there are 8 different countries have fighters who are fighting in Darfur from Arab origins, from Mali, Niger, Central African Republic. And the danger, sometimes you have to tie to the U.S. national security for them to understand these folks are all having Arab Islamic ideology. And in the event that they don't respond now, Chad is a fragile state, Central Africa, Libya, this will be a terrorist hub. If it is not prevented today, tomorrow they will be forced to respond, but by that time it will be very too late, let alone the suffering of the people of Sudan, and then also accountability for the more serious international crimes. I think it's very, very important to also to focus on accountability part as well as also, but right now what we are seeking is an emergency humanitarian aid delivery, civilian protection, and then accountability. But there are aspects of the financial accountability and also pressure on the United Arab Emirates. The staff from the side, they have been receiving support from Iran, from Turkey, Egypt. This all also the US have the ability and other member states to exercise pressure on these allies in the region to stop fueling war in Sudan.
So I understand that you are appealing for us to be advocates for increased humanitarian aid, emergency humanitarian aid. Tom Stahl was describing how difficult it is to get aid in there. Tom Pritchard was also calling upon us to engage with whatever faith community you are part of and urge them to make the issue of the genocide that's ongoing, the crisis ongoing in Sudan, a major focus for their parishioners. I know that you have inspired us to do more in the coming year and to focus our efforts through AFRECS to raise public awareness and to get materials out to people who need information. I want to invite each of the panelists to make a final closing comment, and I would invite you to do the same, Dane. We'll just go around. This has been a very moving conversation, and I know that some people are probably shocked to find out how widespread and devastating the situation is for the Darfuri, but as well for the entire nation of Sudan, and its impacts in the region. I can't underscore enough what Nimat was pointing to. So let me turn to you, Tom Pritchard, and then I'll go quickly to the other panelists after you.
I think the key is for us to talk to our friends and neighbors, organize interfaith gatherings, call people together, and awaken them about this. I think if people were aware, they would be appalled and they would get active and they'd put pressure. I think, for example, United Arab Emirates would fold in a minute if they saw how the rest of the world ought to see them. So I think that's key. And I think for us to do everything we can, we have various speakers from the Masalit who would be powerful voices if people have Zoom calls or whatever to hear the firsthand account. So I think this is a wonderful pathway to help make a difference.
I would just say that the Episcopal Church passed a resolution to create a season of prayer for the Sudans. That is something that we should all be engaged with. And I would now invite Dane to make a comment, and then we'll go to Tom Stahl.
One thing I think it's important to understand about Sudan. Sudan is a very diverse place. The previous governments have given the idea that Sudan is a Muslim and Arab country, and that is a great mistake. We've already heard from Nimat the diversity that is Darfur. It's hard to think of these groups that are being attacked. Why are they being attacked? It seems to be a racial concept. It's not religion. They're all Muslim. And within the Sudan itself, there are 1 million Episcopalians. There are 1 million Roman Catholics. There are also a considerable population of Coptics. So there is great diversity. And the only solution for Sudan in the end, if it is to keep together and prosper in any way, is to recognize that diversity politically and bring all these groups together. I think that's very important. I would mention one more point about the Episcopal Church. I have just been struck by the fact that the Episcopal Church, which was routed out of its cathedral by the RSF, which actually bivouacked troops in its cathedral, they managed to get to Port Sudan and restart. And they have been able to get small amounts of aid to churches in various dioceses. It's been very difficult. Some of the food coming in now to the Diocese of Kadugli in the Nuba Mountains is coming in from South Sudan. But this is a place where different religious groups are operative and alive, and they need our support. And I completely endorse the idea of an interfaith effort in the United States to bring attention to this horrible situation, put pressure on the U.S. government, on the U.S. Congress to do something about it.
Thank you, Tom Stahl.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to echo what others have said, Tom and Dane. Talk to your neighbors, to your friends, to people in your church, to raise the awareness of what's going on there. Write to your congressperson, either at the state level or at the national level, to be more aware of this and raise the issue. It needs to be more, on the screen of people, and through that we can hopefully get more pressure on those countries, governments that are supporting the two warring parties. And then, through the church, through other international organizations, there are ways to provide support through the ERRs, that emergency response rooms that Dane was mentioning, and other sort of local community groups like that, church organizations, and they're able to then provide at least some funding. But yeah, just get the word out that this is a huge disaster that's there, and it has implications in the neighborhood, as Tom Pritchard was saying, and Dane. If you look at the countries around, a lot of them are either unstable, or very needy themselves, whether it's Chad or Central African Republic, South Sudan, Ethiopia. All of them are facing their own problems, and by this disaster in the midst of them, it could easily reverberate around East Africa. So got to get the word out.
I think that is the point that Nimat was underscoring as well. There are many people on the chat that have a wealth of information. And this is a group that I think that could be very powerful in calling for action. Nimat, I'd like to invite you to add anything that, as you've been listening to the conversation, what have we missed?
Well, thank you. I'd like to close with that. Speak out, because silence only aids the perpetrator, and silence kills more people. The more people in this group speaking out and bringing in their neighbors, their relatives, their congregations member, and others, that we can form a power, and the power of people you cannot undermine. Also partner with Sudanese-led organization, those of us who have present on the ground. If you have groups here within this group they are working with refugees. Also, there are tons of refugees in Kampala, in Uganda, in Chad. Their needs are yet to be met. And some people stuck in Libya, in South Sudan. So we ourselves as an organization stretched so thin. We're trying to be registered in Kampala, in South Sudan. We are on the process to operate in Chad, because the need is just huge, and the suffering is. And then on the ground, pushing for a humanitarian access. The more we get access, the more we can document atrocities and can pursue accountability. And without enabling environment, if there is no civilian protection effort on the ground, there will not be any ability for the aid or workers to work on the ground. Even volunteers, at some point, they may go away and abandon their people. So keep the people of Sudan and the people of Darfur in particular in your prayer, and continue to partner with us, and let us know how we can help you help us. Thank you so much for listening to us, and thank you for organizing this. We look forward to continue to working with you.
We can only say to you, Nimat, that we want to continue these efforts, and I believe everybody on the chat has been asking for more information, more resources, and we hear the call. I have to acknowledge Dane Smith, his insight into offering this topic for us to discuss. Joe Swimmer from the Episcopal Parish Network has indicated that they will make the chat and the recording available to everyone who participated, so you can go back and review that. We would like to keep in touch with all of you. There are many things that are going to be available to us with a new administration. We need to use the transition to a new administration to educate new legislators, to put pressure on the new State Department officials. So this is the time to get ready. I would like to again thank Tom Pritchard, Tom Stahl, and especially you, Nimat, for joining the panel. We hope to do this again in early 2025. I would just like to close with a prayer for the people of Sudan. We stand with the people of Darfur, and we ask God's grace and blessing to strengthen those who are suffering. I will just ask that you continue to engage with this. And we will end the call here. If there are people who want to leave another message in the chat, that will remain open for a couple of minutes. Thank you all.